Section 20 of the Fireside Chats of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Melvin Lee. The Fireside Chats of Franklin Delano Roosevelt by Franklin D. Roosevelt. Section 20. February 23, 1942. Part 1. My fellow Americans, Washington's birthday is a most appropriate occasion for us to talk with each other about other things as they are today and things as we know they shall be in the future. For 8 years, General Washington and his Continental Army were faced continually with formidable odds and reoccurring defeats. Supplies and equipment were lacking. In a sense, every winter was a Valley Forge. Throughout the 13 states there existed fifth columnists and selfish men, jealous men, fearful men who proclaimed that Washington's cause was hopeless and that he should ask for a negotiated peace. Washington's conduct in those hard times has provided the model for all Americans ever since, a model of moral stamina. He held to his course as it had been charted in the Declaration of Independence. He and the brave men who served with him knew that no man's life or fortune was secure without freedom and free institutions. The present great struggle has taught us increasingly that freedom of persons and security of property everywhere in the world depend upon the security of the rights and obligations of liberty and justice everywhere in the world. This war is a new kind of war. It is different from all other wars of the past, not only in its methods and weapons, but also in its geography. It is a warfare in terms of every continent, every island, every sea, every air lane in the world. That is the reason why I have asked you to take out and spread before you a map of the whole earth, and to follow with me the references which I shall make to the world-encircling battle lines of this war. Many questions will, I fear, remain unanswered tonight, but I know you will realize that I cannot cover everything in one short report to the people. The broad oceans, which have been heralded in the past as our protection from attack, have become endless battlefields on which we are constantly being challenged by our enemies. We must all understand and face the hard fact that our job now is to fight at distances which extend all the way around the globe. We fight at these vast distances because that is where our enemies are. Until our flow of supplies gives us clear superiority, we must keep on striking our enemies wherever and whenever we can meet them, even if for a while we have to yield ground. Actually, though, we are taking a heavy toll of the enemy every day that goes by. We must fight at these vast distances to protect our supply lines and our lines of communication with our allies. Protect these lines from the enemies who are bending every ounce of their strength, striving against time to cut them. The object of the Nazis and the Japanese is to separate the United States, Britain, China, and Russia, and to isolate them one from another, so that each will be surrounded and cut off from sources of supplies and reinforcements. It is the old familiar Axis policy of divide and conquer. There are those who still think, however, in terms of the days of sailing ships. They advise us to pull our warships and our planes and our merchant ships into our own home waters and concentrate solely on last-ditch defense. But let me illustrate what would happen if we followed such foolish advice. Look at your map. Look at the vast area of China with its millions of fighting men. Look at the vast area of Russia with its powerful armies and proven military might. Look at the British Isles, Australia, New Zealand, and the Dutch Indies, India, the Near East, and the continent of Africa, with their resources of raw materials and of peoples determined to resist Axis domination. Look too at North America, Central America, and South America, It is obvious what would happen if all these great reservoirs of power were cut off from each other, either by enemy action or by self-imposed isolation. First, in such a case, we could no longer send aid of any kind to China. To the brave people who, for nearly 5 years, have withstood Japanese assault, destroyed hundreds of thousands of Japanese soldiers, and vast quantities of Japanese war munitions, it is essential that we help China in her magnificent defense and in her inevitable counteroffensive, for that is one important element in the defeat of Japan. Second, if we lost communication with the South Pacific, all of that area, including Australia and New Zealand and the Dutch Indies, would fall under Japanese domination. Japan in such a case could release great numbers of ships and men to launch attacks on a large scale against the coasts of Western Hemisphere, South America and Central America, and North America, including Alaska. At the same time, she could immediately extend her conquests in the other direction toward India and through the Indian Ocean to Africa, to the Near East, and try to join forces with Germany and Italy. Third, if we were to stop sending munitions to the British and the Russians in the Mediterranean, in the Persian Gulf and the Red Sea, we would be helping the Nazis to overrun Turkey, Syria, Iraq, Persia, Egypt, and the Suez Canal, the whole coast of North Africa itself, and with that, inevitably, the whole coast of West Africa, putting Germany within easy striking distance of South America, 1,500 miles away. Fourth, if by such a fatuous policy we cease to protect the North Atlantic supply line to Britain and to Russia, we would help to cripple the splendid counteroffensive by Russia against the Nazis, and we would help to deprive Britain of essential food supplies and munitions. Those Americans who believed that we could live under the illusion of isolationism wanted the American eagle to imitate the tactics of the ostrich. Now, many of those same people, afraid that we may be sticking our necks out, want our national bird to be turned into a turtle. But we prefer to retain the eagle as it is, flying high and striking hard. I know that I speak for the mass of the American people when I say that we reject the turtle policy, and will continue increasingly the policy of carrying the war to the enemy in distant lands and distant waters, as far away as possible from our own home grounds. There are 4 main lines of communication now being traveled by our ships: the North Atlantic, the South Atlantic, the Indian Ocean, and the South Pacific. These routes are not one-way streets, for the ships that carry our troops and munitions outbound bring back essential raw materials which we require for our own use. The maintenance of these vital lines is a very tough job. It is a job which requires tremendous daring, tremendous resourcefulness, and above all, tremendous production of planes and tanks and guns, and also of ships to carry them. And I speak again for the American people when I say that we can and will do that job. The defense of the worldwide lines of communication demands relatively safe use by us of the sea and of the air along the various routes, and this in turn depends upon control by the United Nations of many strategic bases along those routes. Control of the air involves the simultaneous use of 2 types of planes. First, the long-range heavy bomber, and second, the light bombers, dive bombers, torpedo planes, and short-range pursuit planes, all of which are essential to the protection of the bases and of the bombers themselves. Heavy bombers can fly under their own power from here to the Southwest Pacific, but the smaller planes cannot. Therefore, these lighter planes have to be packed in crates and sent on board cargo ships. Look at your map again, and you will see that the route is long and in many places perilous, either across the South Atlantic all the way around South Africa and the Cape of Good Hope, or from California to the East Indies direct. A vessel can make a round trip by either route in about 4 months, or only 3 round trips in a whole year. In spite of the length, and in spite of the difficulties of this transportation, I can tell you that in 2.5 months, we already have a large number of bombers and pursuit planes manned by American pilots and crews, which are now in daily contact with the enemy in the Southwest Pacific, and thousands of American troops are today in that area engaged in operations not only in the air, but on the ground as well. In this battle area, Japan has had an obvious initial advantage, for she could fly even her short-range planes to the points of attack by using many stepping stones open to her, bases in the multitude of Pacific islands, and also bases on the China coast, Indo-China coast, and in Thailand and Malay coast. Japanese troop transports could go south from Japan and from China through the narrow China Sea, which can be protected by Japanese planes throughout its whole length. I ask you to look at your maps again, particularly in that portion of the Pacific Ocean lying west of Hawaii. Before this war even started, the Philippine Islands were already surrounded on 3 sides by Japanese power. On the west, the China side, the Japanese were in possession of the coast of China and the coast of Indo-China, which had been yielded to them by the Vichy French. On the north are the islands of Japan themselves, reaching down almost to northern Luzon. On the east are the Mandated Islands, which Japan had occupied exclusively and had fortified in absolute violation of her written word. The islands that lie between Hawaii and the Philippines, these islands, hundreds of them, appear only as small dots on most maps, but they cover a large strategic area. Guam lies in the middle of them, a lone outpost which we have never fortified. Under the Washington Treaty of 1921, we had solemnly agreed not to add to the fortification of the Philippines. We had no safe naval bases there, so we could not use the islands for extensive naval operations. Immediately after this war started, the Japanese forces moved down on either side of the Philippines to numerous points south of them, thereby completely encircling the Philippines from north, south, east, and west. It is that complete encirclement, with control of the air by Japanese land-based aircraft, which has prevented us from sending substantial reinforcements of men and material to the gallant defenders of the Philippines. For 40 years it has always been our strategy, a strategy born of necessity, that in the event of a full-scale attack on the islands by Japan, we should fight a delaying action, attempting to retire slowly into Bataan Peninsula and Corregidor. We knew that the war as a whole would have to be fought and won by a process of attrition against Japan itself. We knew all along that, with our great resources, we could ultimately outbuild Japan and ultimately overwhelm her on sea and on land and in the air. We knew that, to obtain our objective, many varieties of operations would be necessary in other areas other than the Philippines. Now, nothing that has occurred in the past 2 months has caused us to revise this basic strategy of necessity, except that the defense put up by General MacArthur has magnificently exceeded the previous estimates of endurance, and he and his men are gaining eternal glory therefore. MacArthur's army of Filipinos and Americans, and the forces of the United Nations in China, in Burma, and the Netherlands East Indies, are all together fulfilling the same essential task. They are making Japan pay an increasingly terrible price for her ambitious attempts to seize control of the whole Asiatic world. Every Japanese transport sunk off Java is one less transport that they can use to carry reinforcements to their army opposing General MacArthur in Luzon. End of section 20.